The mysterious disappearance, the cold winds of Willow Creek howled through the dense towering trees, whispering secrets no one dared to speak aloud. In the heart of Alaska's untamed wilderness, this small town stood, surrounded by the vast, ever-encroaching forest. It was a place where the sun barely touched the earth in winter, and the silence was as thick as the snow that blanketed the ground. The people who lived here were a breed apart. Tough, resilient, accustomed to the brutal forces of nature, and yet even they knew there was something about this place that was different, something sinister that lived in the shadows of the trees, waiting. Samuel Adams had always felt at home in Willow Creek. An experienced outdoorsman with a deep love for the wild, he thrived in the very environment that others found terrifying. For Samuel, the woods were a sanctuary, a place to clear his mind, reconnect with nature, and escape the chaos of everyday life. It wasn't that he sought danger, he simply understood the wilderness in a way that few others did. The wilderness was his refuge, and it had always given him peace. But on that fateful morning when Samuel set off for his routine hunting trip, something shifted. There was a chill in the air that morning, a chill that went beyond the crispness of the early autumn winds. Something felt wrong. But on that fateful morning, when Samuel set off for his routine hunting trip, something shifted. There was a chill in the air that morning, a chill that went beyond the crispness of the early autumn winds. Something felt wrong. The sun hadn't yet fully risen as Samuel drove his truck out of the small town and onto the dirt roads that led deep into the wilderness. The landscape, blanketed in layers of gold and amber from the fading fall season, seemed to stretch endlessly. The hum of the truck's engine was the only sound that pierced the quiet, the rhythmic beat of tires over gravel, a stark contrast to the stillness that enveloped the land. Samuel's destination was a secluded area near the edge of the forest, a spot he had frequented many times over the years. It was familiar, safe. Or so he thought. Hours passed, and by the time the first signs of dusk began to settle, Grace Marshall, Samuel's fiancée, felt a creeping unease. She had grown accustomed to his absence during hunting trips, but this was different. Samuel was never late, not without calling, not without at least a quick check-in. She had always trusted him, trusted his skills in the wilderness, but tonight, as she stared at the setting sun through their cabin's window, something in her gut twisted. Something wasn't right. By nightfall, Grace's growing worry had turned to dread. She had called his phone multiple times, but it rang straight to voicemail. Panic set in when she realized Samuel hadn't even left a message, something that was unlike him. She paced the cabin, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, alone, somewhere in the vast wilderness. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. Maybe he had just lost track of time. Maybe he was caught up in the hunt, as he often was. But deep down, Grace knew something was terribly wrong. She had to act. The next morning, with no word from Samuel, Grace made the decision to go out herself. She grabbed her keys, her jacket, and without a second thought headed out in search of him. As she drove to the trailhead where Samuel had parked his truck the day before, her heart pounded in her chest. The landscape, though beautiful, seemed to close in on her. The trees stood like silent sentinels, watching her every move. When she arrived at the spot, her blood ran cold. There, parked exactly where it had been the day before, was Samuel's truck. The door was ajar, the engine cold, and the silence that hung over the area was suffocating. Grace stepped out of the truck, her boots crunching the gravel beneath her feet. She walked around the vehicle, her breath coming in shallow gasps. No signs of struggle, no broken branches, no marks on the ground. It was as if Samuel had just vanished into thin air. She checked inside the truck, finding it undisturbed, his rifle, his hunting gear, all still in place. The only thing out of place was a torn piece of his jacket, caught on a branch just a few feet away from the truck. Grace's mind raced. She knew Samuel had never been careless. If something had happened to him, there would be signs, traces, clues. But there was nothing. Just that damn silence, the kind that felt like it was choking the life out of her. She called Officer Isaac Wells, a local lawman who had worked in Willow Creek for years. Isaac had seen his fair share of disappearances over the years, but nothing that felt as off as this. When he arrived, his expression was unreadable. He was calm, methodical as he surveyed the scene. He checked the truck, the surrounding area, and the forest edge. There was nothing, not a single footprint, not a broken branch, just silence. He radioed for backup, but as the hours dragged on, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a simple case of someone getting lost in the woods. Something else was at play here. As Isaac and the rest of the search party combed the area, Grace's mind churned with dark thoughts. What if he hadn't just gotten lost? What if he had been taken? But by what? The woods? Or something more sinister? The sun set on Willow Creek that evening, and still there was no sign of Samuel. The search would continue, but the gnawing feeling in Grace's chest told her that the answer was out there, hidden somewhere in the wilderness. She couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel had discovered something dangerous, something he shouldn't have. And that thought terrified her more than anything else. What if the wilderness had taken him? What if something far darker was lurking just out of sight, waiting for its next victim? Whatever the truth was, Grace knew one thing for sure. Samuel had vanished without a trace, and the search for him had only just begun. The frustration of the search for Samuel had stretched on, day after day, a constant rhythm of hope and despair that pulled at the very fabric of Willow Creek. What had begun as a quiet disappearance now loomed over the town like a dark cloud. Grace, desperate to find the man she loved, could no longer ignore the gnawing sensation that something far more sinister was at play. The landscape she had known her whole life now felt unfamiliar, even hostile. The trees no longer whispered secrets, but warnings. It was the fifth day when Grace, unable to stay still, set out again, her resolve harder than steel. The bitter cold of the Alaskan autumn had begun to bite at her skin, but it did nothing to dampen the fire inside her. She refused to let go of the belief that Samuel was still out there, that he was waiting to be found. She wasn't alone in her pursuit. Officer Isaac Wells, a seasoned lawman with years of experience, was by her side, though his patience was wearing thin. Isaac had seen disappearances before, but nothing like this. He couldn't understand it, and the lack of answers was beginning to eat away at him. Grace had reached out to the entire town for help, hoping that some small clue, some piece of evidence might reveal itself. The locals were a tight-knit group, the kind of people who had built their lives in the shadow of the wilderness. They were used to the harsh conditions, the isolation, but they weren't accustomed to what was happening now. Some whispered that perhaps the town was cursed, as old legend. Others believed it was simply a case of a man getting lost in the vast expanse of wilderness, something that happened more often than anyone liked to admit. But there was one thing everyone agreed on. This was no ordinary case. Something was wrong. Isaac had started making calls to local search and rescue teams, bringing in dogs, drones, and thermal imaging cameras. Yet, with every new attempt, the situation only grew more frustrating. The dogs, normally reliable, were lost in the thick forest, circling aimlessly. The drones scanned the treetops, but there was no sign of Samuel. The landscape, so familiar to the townsfolk, now felt like an endless maze, each turn leading them further away from answers. The wilderness itself seemed to mock them, its silence a constant reminder that they were powerless against it. Grace watched Isaac's determination falter, though he tried his best to hide it. She saw it in his eyes, the doubt creeping in, the question that had begun to surface in every lawman's mind. Had Samuel simply walked off, or had something else happened to him? Something they couldn't explain. Something far more terrifying than anyone dared to acknowledge. Grace couldn't let herself think like that. She refused to believe that Samuel had disappeared without a trace, that he was gone and never coming back. The thought was unbearable, and it drove her to push even harder. She knew Samuel, knew his skills in the wilderness, knew how careful he was. There was no way he had just wandered off and gotten lost. No, this was something more, something that had drawn him into the heart of the forest, something that had taken him. And so she kept searching, day after day, even as the weather turned colder and the days grew shorter. Each time they found a new clue, a broken twig, a footprint that led nowhere, a piece of torn clothing. Grace felt a faint glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. But the longer the search went on, the more the town began to show signs of wear. People who had once been eager to help now began to withdraw. There were murmurs that perhaps it was time to let go, to face the inevitable. But Grace couldn't. She wouldn't. It was on the sixth day of the search that a breakthrough came, though it wasn't the kind of answer Grace had been hoping for. A local pilot, an older man who had been flying in and out of Willow Creek for decades, contacted Isaac with some unsettling news. He had flown over the area where Samuel's truck had been found, and as he scanned the land below, he had seen something strange. something that caught his eye in the dense forest. It wasn't much, just a faint light, but it was enough to send Isak and Grace into the woods once again. The air was thick with anticipation as they trudged through the cold, barren forest, their footsteps muffled by the blanket of leaves that covered the ground. The light from the pilot's report was nothing more than a flicker, but it had been enough to raise their hopes. As they approached the location, Grace's heart began to pound. They had followed the pilot's directions precisely, but as they drew closer, they realized that what they had been searching for wasn't there at all. The light had vanished. The spot was nothing more than a clearing in the forest, silent and still. There was no sign of Samuel. No signs of anything at all. For the first time since the search began, Grace felt herself falter. The fear that had been building in her chest exploded into something raw and terrifying. What if Samuel was lost forever? What if they were chasing ghosts, trying to find a man who had simply vanished into thin air? It was a thought she couldn't entertain, not yet. Not while there was still a sliver of hope. But the cold, hard reality of the situation was starting to settle in. Isaac, too, had begun to feel the weight of the uncertainty. He had been a part of countless search and rescue missions, but nothing had prepared him for this. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something in the woods, something watching them, something they couldn't see. His instincts told him that Samuel's disappearance wasn't just an accident or an unfortunate turn of events. It was something else, something dark. And as the search stretched into its second week, Isaac began to wonder if they were fighting a battle they couldn't win. Grace couldn't allow herself to accept that. She refused to believe that Samuel was gone, that he was lost forever. Her love for him, the bond they shared, kept her going. It was the only thing that mattered now. She couldn't stop searching. She wouldn't stop until she found the truth. But deep down she knew the truth was becoming more elusive with every passing hour, every dead end, and every unanswered question. The woods of Willow Creek were hiding something, and whatever it was, it had taken Samuel, and it wasn't about to let him go without a fight. Theories and the unraveling of truth. The days had blurred together into an unrelenting cycle of dead ends and fading hope. Each new theory, each fresh search attempt only led to more questions and fewer answers. Grace had never expected the hunt for Samuel to be easy, but she never imagined that it would feel like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. The more she looked, the less she found. And now, the weight of that truth, the sense that whatever had taken Samuel was far beyond any ordinary disappearance, seemed to press down on her chest with every breath she took. But even as the darkness of doubt began to settle in, new theories began to arise. Theories that brought the kind of unsettling discomfort that Grace had been avoiding all along. As the investigation into Samuel's disappearance continued, the town of Willow Creek found itself at the center of a whirlwind of strange and impossible explanations. Some were born out of fear, some out of desperation, but all of them added to the growing sense of mystery and dread that had begun to suffocate the community. One of the first theories to surface was the one that everyone seemed to want to avoid, the possibility that Samuel had been abducted by extraterrestrials. It was the kind of theory that no one in Willow Creek was willing to speak of out loud, at least not at first. But as more and more bizarre events seemed to unfold, whispers began to circulate. It started with the unusual sightings in the skies, strange lights that had been reported by a few of the locals in the weeks leading up to Samuel's disappearance. They were nothing extraordinary, just brief flashes in the night sky. But in a place like Willow Creek, where the vastness of the wilderness swallowed up everything in sight, those brief moments seemed to mean something more. Grace had heard the stories. She had been told about the odd lights that flickered in the distance, about the unexplained sounds that filled the air late at night, but she had always brushed them off as nothing more than superstition, until now. The more she looked into the stories, the more she realized that something about the town's history didn't quite add up. There were too many disappearances, too many unsolved mysteries for them all to be explained away by the natural challenges of living in the Alaskan wilderness. She began to wonder if there was something else at work here, something ancient and unknowable. But then, a more disturbing theory emerged. Some of the townspeople began to speculate that something was hiding in the very woods that had claimed so many lives before. This was the theory that Grace couldn't shake, the idea that the wilderness itself, or something within it, was the cause of the disappearances. It was as if there was something waiting for the right moment to pull people into its depths, something ancient that no one could fully comprehend. The more Grace thought about it, the more it made sense. Samuel had always been cautious, always aware of his surroundings, but the woods were a place that no one truly understood, not completely. A local historian named Charlotte Davidson had begun to dig into the history of Willow Creek, searching through old records and journals in an attempt to uncover any clues about the land's dark past. Charlotte had long been fascinated by the town's history, its strange folklore, and its deep connection to the wilderness, and what she found only deepened the mystery. The town had been founded over a century ago, during a time when gold was discovered in the nearby mountains. But it wasn't just the gold that had drawn people to the area. There were rumors of an ancient, secretive group of settlers who had come to Willow Creek in search of something far more valuable than gold. Some said they had uncovered an artifact in the mountains, something that had been hidden for centuries, something that, when disturbed, unleashed a curse on the land. Charlotte found evidence that suggested these settlers had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only whispers of their existence. The town's oldest residents, those who still remembered the earliest days of Willow Creek, spoke in hushed tones about the curse of the forest, an old legend that had been passed down through generations. According to the legend, the land was haunted by something dark, something that lived beneath the surface of the earth. The settlers had disturbed it, and in return, it had claimed them. The disappearances began then. One by one, people were swallowed by the wilderness, never to be seen again. Grace couldn't ignore the connection. If Samuel had stumbled upon something buried deep within the forest, something ancient, something dangerous, could that explain his disappearance? It was a thought that chilled her to the bone, but she couldn't dismiss it. The more she looked into the legend, the more she realized how much it aligned with what was happening now. It was as if the town's past was repeating itself, and Samuel was the latest victim in a long line of disappearances that stretched back for over a century. But even as Grace became more and more convinced that something supernatural was at work, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hopelessness creeping in. The authorities, including Officer Isaac Wells, had grown increasingly skeptical. Despite the mounting evidence of strange occurrences, Isaac couldn't bring himself to believe in the supernatural. He was a man of logic, of reason, and while he had seen his fair share of disappearances, nothing had ever felt as inexplicable as Samuel's case. He refused to entertain the idea that Samuel's disappearance was anything but a tragic accident or a case of poor judgment. The idea of something more sinister lurking in the wilderness was simply too much to fathom. Still, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. She began to question everything, every step of the search, every theory, every piece of evidence. Were they being led astray by fear and superstition? Or was there something real, something dangerous hidden beneath the surface? The more she thought about it, the more it seemed that Samuel had known something, discovered something that had led him to the heart of the wilderness. Whatever it was, it had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many before him. And so Grace pushed on, determined to uncover the truth. She couldn't rest, not until she found Samuel. Even as the theories piled up, as the days stretched on without answers, Grace clung to the belief that there was something out there waiting to be found. But with each passing day, the wilderness seemed to grow more foreboding, its secrets more elusive. The question remained, what had happened to Samuel Adams? And whatever it was, could anyone survive the truth? A personal and emotional toll. The passage of time had done little to lessen the weight of Samuel's disappearance. In fact, the longer the search dragged on, the more it felt like a crushing burden that Grace could not escape. Each new lead that went nowhere, each fresh attempt that proved fruitless, deepened the chasm of uncertainty in her heart. Willow Creek, once a place of comfort and familiarity, had become a prison of questions, its silence echoing the absence of the man she had loved for so long. As the days turned to weeks, the search began to lose its urgency. The police, once so involved, began to pull back as if the case were already fading into the annals of unsolved mysteries. People in town stopped asking questions, stopped searching. It was as if they had already given up, had resigned themselves to the idea that Samuel The passage of time had done little to lessen the weight of Samuel's disappearance. In fact, the longer the search dragged on, the more it felt like a crushing burden that Grace could not escape. Each new lead that went nowhere, each fresh attempt that proved fruitless, deepened the chasm of uncertainty in her heart. Willow Creek, once a place of comfort and familiarity, had become a prison of questions, its silence echoing the absence of the man she had loved for so long. As the days turned to weeks, the search began to lose its urgency. The police, once so involved, began to pull back as if the case were already fading into the annals of unsolved mysteries. People in town stopped asking questions, stopped searching. It was as if they had already given up, had resigned themselves to the idea that Samuel was gone, lost to the wilderness or to some unknowable fate. But Grace could not and would not accept that. She could feel it in her bones that something was still out there, something she was meant to find. The isolation of her grief had begun to take its toll. Her nights were long, filled with restless sleep and tortured dreams of Samuel. In these dreams he was always just out of reach, a silhouette in the distance that she could never quite grasp. It was as though the very act of trying to find him was driving him further away, as if the wilderness itself was pulling him deeper into its dark heart. Despite the pain, Grace couldn't let go. She couldn't abandon the hope that she could bring Samuel home. Even as her body grew weary and her spirit began to fray at the edges, she pushed forward. The more she searched, the more she was consumed by it. She began to lose track of time, of her surroundings, as though she were walking in a trance. The relentless pursuit of answers had become all-consuming, and with it a part of her had changed. She no longer recognized the person she had been before, the one who could find joy in the smallest moments. Now, every waking hour was marked by a desperate need to understand, to uncover the truth that seemed to elude her at every turn. It was during one of these long, lonely nights that Grace found herself revisiting the journal of the early settler, the one Charlotte had given her. The pages of the journal were yellowed with age, the ink faded in places, but the words seemed as vivid as ever. It was here that she found something new, something that made her blood run cold. The settler had written about an ancient presence in the woods, something that had been there long before the town was founded. The land, he wrote, was cursed, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. People had disappeared before, and it was said that they had been taken by something dark, something that lived beneath the surface of the earth. Grace read the words over and over again, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the answer she had been searching for. But even as the pieces began to fall into place, a new fear crept in. What if Samuel hadn't just been lost? What if he had found something in the forest? Something that had claimed him? The thought consumed her. She couldn't help but picture him out there, in the woods, alone and scared, facing whatever had taken him. But at the same time, a small part of her refused to accept the idea of him being gone forever. There had to be more to the story. There had to be a way to bring him back. In the midst of this overwhelming uncertainty, Grace found herself standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the vast, dark expanse of trees that had once seemed so inviting. Now they loomed over her like silent sentinels, guarding the secrets that lay within. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, the wind rustling through the leaves like the whispered voices of the past. For a moment, Grace closed her eyes, trying to summon the courage to step forward. She had been here so many times before, searching for Samuel, but each time she had felt the pull of something stronger, something far more terrifying. But now, standing at the edge of the forest, she knew that she had to keep going. She had to know what had happened to him, and she had to find the truth, no matter the cost. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the silence pressed in around her, heavy and oppressive. Every snap of a twig underfoot seemed to echo through the trees. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper from the past. The forest seemed alive, as if it were watching her, waiting for her to discover its secrets. The deeper she went, the more the world around her seemed to shift, as though the very fabric of reality was warping, bending to something unseen. Hours passed as Grace walked deeper into the forest, her mind racing with thoughts of Samuel and the strange forces that seemed to be at work. She knew she was getting closer, that whatever had taken him was waiting for her at the heart of this forest. But as the shadows lengthened and the darkness grew thicker, A growing unease began to settle in. The trees, once familiar, now seemed foreign, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. The air grew colder and Grace shivered despite herself. And then, as if the forest itself had come alive, she saw something. It was a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between the trees just out of reach. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be Samuel? Could he be out here, waiting for her to find him? She called out his name, but her voice seemed to vanish into the trees, swallowed by the thick silence. There was no answer. Grace's fear began to creep in, but she couldn't stop herself. She had come this far, she had to know. With renewed determination she pushed forward, the shadows closing in around her. She was getting closer to the truth, she could feel it. But the closer she came, the more the forest seemed to pull her deeper into its grip. The truth, Grace realized, was not just something to be found. It was something that would change everything. And as the night stretched on and the forest seemed to press in on all sides, she knew that whatever lay ahead, she would never be the same again. The darkness was waiting for her to uncover its secrets, and it would not let her go easily. The final revelation. The search for Samuel had stretched on for months, and yet the answers seemed more elusive than ever. Each passing day deepened the chasm of uncertainty that had settled in Grace's heart. It was as if the very land around Willow Creek had swallowed him whole, leaving only fragments of a man she loved, scattered like lost whispers in the wind. The thought of Samuel, out there in the wilderness, somewhere between life and death, became a constant ache, one that no amount of searching could heal. Grace stood at the edge of the forest once again, feeling the weight of all that had transpired. The cool autumn air swept around her, its cold fingers brushing against her skin, but she was numb to it now. The forest stretched out before her, its vastness both intimidating and comforting in its silence. For months she had been consumed by the need to find Samuel, to bring him home, but what if there was no home to bring him back to? What if the wilderness had taken him, as it had taken so many before him? There was no denying it anymore. The forest had its hold on Willow Creek. The more Grace dug into the town's past, the more she realized that Samuel's disappearance was not an isolated event. It was part of something far larger, a cycle of mysteries that had plagued this land for generations. It was as though the land itself was alive, a living entity with its own desires, its own hunger for those who dared to uncover its secrets. The more Grace researched, the more she uncovered strange accounts from the town's earliest days. The settlers who had come to Willow Creek had been drawn to the promise of gold, but there was something darker beneath the surface. The old journals spoke of an ancient presence in the land, a force that had been there long before the settlers arrived. Some believed it was a spirit, a curse that had been awakened when the first settlers disturbed the land. Others spoke of something even more ancient, a creature, or perhaps a presence, that had existed long before human memory could recall. The more Grace learned, the more the pieces fell into place. Samuel had gone into the forest alone, a place that he knew intimately, and yet something had changed that day. Something had drawn him deeper, farther than he had ever gone before. Grace's thoughts turned back to the map she had found in the settler's journal, the one that had led her and Charlotte to the small, decaying cabin in the forest. She had believed it to be a sign, a clue that would lead her to Samuel. But now she wasn't so sure. The map was leading her to something, yes, but not to Samuel. It was leading her to something far older, far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. Grace's mind raced as she walked deeper into the forest, the trees seeming to close in around her. She couldn't explain it, but there was a pull, a magnetic force that seemed to guide her every step. The deeper she went, the more the world around her seemed to shift, to warp, as though she were walking between two realities. The air grew thick with tension, and for the first time since the search had begun, Grace felt a chilling sense of clarity. She was no longer searching for Samuel, she was searching for the truth, and the truth she knew now was something far darker than she had ever anticipated. It wasn't long before Grace found herself standing in front of the very place she had been seeking for so long. It was a clearing in the woods, hidden deep within the forest, far from any of the paths she had traveled before. The air was thick with the scent of moss and earth, the ground beneath her feet soft and damp, And yet, despite the eeriness of the place, there was a strange sense of familiarity about it, as if she had been here before, in another life, another time. The silence was deafening as Grace stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. It was here, she realized, that Samuel had disappeared. It was here, in this very spot, that he had vanished without a trace. But what had taken him? What had drawn him to this place, and why had he never returned? Grace's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. The trees stood tall, their branches twisting and reaching into the sky like dark, gnarled fingers. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, as if something was watching her, waiting. Her instinct screamed at her to turn back, to leave this place, but she couldn't. She had come too far. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. As she stepped into the clearing, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, as though the earth itself was alive. The trees seemed to close in around her, blocking out the light, casting the clearing into shadow. Grace's heart raced as she took another step, then another. It was as if the forest was trying to hold her in place, to keep her from uncovering whatever dark secret lay hidden here. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A figure, tall, shadowed, barely visible in the dim light. It was standing just beyond the edge of the clearing, watching her. Grace's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to run, but her feet were frozen to the ground. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, as if waiting for her to approach. For a moment, Grace felt as though she were trapped in a dream, the world around her shifting and bending in unnatural ways. The figure remained still, silent, as though it were part of the forest itself, something that had always been there, waiting for her to find it. The figure took a step forward, and that was when Grace realized it wasn't Samuel. It wasn't human at all. The truth, she understood now, was not something that could be explained, not something that could be rationalized or understood. Some things, Grace realized, were beyond comprehension, and some mysteries were not meant to be solved. She had uncovered the truth about Willow Creek, but it was a truth that would haunt her forever. The land, the forest, the darkness that dwelled within. It had claimed Samuel just as it had claimed so many others before him, and it would continue to claim more long after she was gone. Grace stood frozen in place, the shadows closing in around her. She had come for answers, but all she had found was more darkness, more questions that could never be answered. As she turned, the darkness that could never be, and as the figure moved closer, she understood some things were never meant to be found. The forest had spoken, and Grace had heard its answer. As the eerie tale of Willow Creek and the disappearance of Samuel Adams draws to a close, one cannot help but reflect on the deep, unsettling themes it presents. At its core, this story speaks to the mysteries that lie beyond human understanding, to the forces in the world that we may never truly grasp. It explores the idea that there are places, people, and events in our lives that challenge our beliefs, that stretch the very limits of what we think is possible. It is a reminder that not every question has an answer, and not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some things, as Grace learned, are beyond our control, forces that we cannot explain or even fully comprehend. But beyond the chilling unknowns of this story, there is a powerful lesson: resilience. Grace's journey to find Samuel was filled with pain, doubt, and frustration, but it was also marked by her relentless pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. She exemplifies the strength that lies within us all, the courage to face our deepest fears, the determination to seek answers even when the path is uncertain, and the unwillingness to give up on the people we love. Her journey reminds us that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to keep going, to push through the challenges and unknowns that life throws at us. Moreover, this story challenges us to question the world around us, to not accept things at face value, and to remain curious even when the answers are hard to find. Samuel's disappearance, shrouded in mystery and shadow, encourages us to embrace the unknown, to seek out the truths that may lie hidden in our own lives and in the world. It is a call to never stop searching for meaning, to never stop looking for the deeper truths that might be right in front of us, even if they are wrapped in darkness. In the end, the message is clear. No matter how overwhelming life's questions may seem, the pursuit of answers is a journey worth taking. We may not always find the closure we desire, but the strength we gain from our efforts is invaluable. And while the forest of Willow Creek may have been unforgiving, Grace's unwavering spirit remains a testament to the power of perseverance and the unyielding will to seek the truth. If you've been captivated by this haunting tale and its deeper meanings, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue creating gripping, thought-provoking stories that keep you coming back for more. Join our community and let's explore the mysteries of the world together, one story at a time.